My name is Dana Mercer, and 1 minute before my sister walked down the aisle, my FBI fiancé grabbed my wrist hard enough to make me spill champagne down the front of my dress and whispered, "We need to leave. Right now." At first, I honestly thought he was joking. I remember staring at him like he'd lost his mind. The wedding coordinator was already lining up bridesmaids outside the ballroom doors. String music floated through the old naval club overlooking Charleston Harbor. Somebody nearby smelled like expensive cigars and sea salt. And there I was, standing in 4-inch heels holding my sister's bouquet while my fiancé looked ready to pull a fire alarm. Mark 1 hissed, trying not to smile too hard in front of guests. "This is not funny. I'm not joking." That was the moment my stomach tightened. Because Mark Donovan wasn't dramatic. In the 3 years I'd known him, the man barely raised his voice ordering coffee. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows overlooking the marina. Sailboat lights flickered on the black water. Inside, everything looked warm and polished and expensive enough to make normal people nervous. My sister Emily loved that kind of thing. Crystal chandeliers. White roses imported from somewhere ridiculous. Waiters carrying tiny crab cakes on silver trays nobody actually ate. The whole weekend had felt less like a wedding and more like a performance. And somehow I'd convinced myself that was normal. "Dana." Mark lowered his voice even more. "Please trust me." I glanced toward the bridal suite down the hallway. Emily had asked me 10 minutes earlier if her veil looked crooked. I'd fixed it myself while she stared into the mirror like she was studying someone else's face. At the time, I told myself she was nervous. Everybody gets nervous before weddings. Right. Then I looked back at Mark. He wasn't panicked. That almost scared me more. He looked focused, controlled, like he'd already made a decision and hated every second of it. "What happened?" I whispered. "I'll explain in the car." "No, you don't get to drag me out of my sister's wedding without telling me why." A group of Trevor's relatives brushed past us, laughing loudly, smelling like bourbon and expensive perfume. Old Savannah money. The Hale family practically carried themselves like minor royalty all weekend. Trevor especially. My future brother-in-law had one of those polished southern smiles that always seemed half a second late reaching his eyes. The kind of man who called women sweetheart in public and made it sound less like affection and more like ownership. I should have paid more attention to that. Instead, I kept defending him in my own head. Because Emily was happy. Or at least I thought she was. "Dana!" Mark squeezed my hand tighter. "I'm serious. We need to go before this starts." That phrase stuck with me later. Before this starts. Not before the wedding starts. Before this starts. At the time, though, I was too embarrassed to think clearly. People were already staring. My sister's college roommate gave me a confused little wave from across the hallway. One of the caterers nearly bumped into us carrying champagne glasses. I leaned closer to Mark. "You are humiliating me right now." His jaw tightened. "I know. And Emily, she's not safe." The words hit me so hard I actually laughed once out of pure disbelief. "Not safe from what Trevor sells luxury condos, Mark. He's not Pablo Escobar." Mark didn't answer immediately. And honestly, that silence scared me more than anything else had. Because for the first time all weekend, I started replaying little moments in my head. Emily dropping a wine glass during rehearsal dinner because Trevor snapped at her too sharply. Trevor grabbing her elbow afterward and smiling through clenched teeth. Emily apologizing constantly to everybody. "Sorry the flowers are late. Sorry the seating cards changed. Sorry the bartender ran out of Pinot Noir. Sorry. At one point during dinner, I'd watched Trevor quietly correct Emily's order in front of the waiter. "She'll have the sea bass," he'd said smoothly. Emily had started to say she wanted steak, then stopped. I remembered that suddenly. Clear as day. The ballroom doors opened across the hallway and music swelled louder. The ceremony was seconds away. Mark looked toward the entrance, then back at me. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine fear in his face. Not fear for himself, for me. That changed something. I can't fully explain it even now. Maybe after years in the army, you learn to recognize when somebody's instincts are screaming, even before you know why. I swallowed hard. "You swear you'll explain?" "Yes." I looked once more toward the bridal suite hallway. And right then, Emily stepped into view with our wedding planner beside her. She looked beautiful, but pale. The kind of pale you notice only when you've known someone your whole life. For 1 second, our eyes met, and I swear to God, she looked relieved to see me leaving. Not upset, relieved. That's the part I replayed in my head for months afterward. Mark gently guided me toward the kitchen corridor before guests could stop us. My heels clicked against old tile floors while cooks shouted over steaming trays of shrimp and grits. Outside the harbor, air felt freezing against my bare shoulders. "What the hell is happening?" I demanded once we reached the parking lot. Mark opened the passenger door. "Get in first." "Mark." "Dana." Something in his voice made me stop arguing. The drive out of Charleston was almost completely silent. Rain started halfway across the Ravenel Bridge, soft at first, then harder against the windshield. Downtown lights blurred gold across the glass. I sat there twisting my engagement ring so hard my finger hurt. Finally, about 20 minutes later, Mark exhaled slowly and kept his eyes on the road. "You really didn't notice your sister looked terrified of him?" I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He was quiet for another few seconds. Then he said something that hit harder than anything else that night. Or maybe you noticed he said softly and didn't want to. For the first few minutes after Mark said that, I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because anger was easier than admitting he might be right. I sat in his truck with champagne drying sticky on my dress, my heels kicked halfway off and the rain making little rivers down the passenger window. Charleston disappeared behind us, all those soft yellow lights and old church steeples fading into the dark. "My sister was nervous," I said finally. Mark kept both hands on the wheel. "There's nervous," he said, "and then there's scared to breathe wrong." I turned toward him fast. "You don't know Emily." "No," he said, "but I know fear." That shut me up for about 10 seconds. Then I got mad all over again. Because he was FBI. Because he noticed things for a living. Because he could walk into a room and see what everybody else missed. And because I hated that, just maybe I had missed something I should have seen first. "She's always been emotional," I said. "Weddings are stressful. Trevor's family is intense. You saw his mother." Mark gave a short, humorless breath through his nose. "His mother doesn't scare me." "Then what does—" He looked like he was choosing every word with pliers. "Trevor Hale's name has come across some conversations at work." I straightened in my seat. "What conversations?" "I can't give you details." "Are you kidding me?" "Dana." "No. Don't Dana me. You dragged me out of my sister's wedding like the building was about to explode, and now you're giving me half sentences." He pulled into a gas station outside Mount Pleasant, one of those brightly lit places with a subway attached, and two tired-looking palm trees bending in the rain. He parked under the canopy but didn't turn off the engine. His face looked older in that dashboard light. "There have been financial complaints," he said. "Possible intimidation tied to people who invested with his company. Some allegations involving women. Nothing clean. Nothing I can talk about like it's a case file." I stared at him. "Allegations involving women." He nodded once. "Against Trevor." He didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. My first instinct was to reject it. I know that sounds stupid now. But when something threatens the version of your family you've been carrying around for 41 years, your brain doesn't open the door and say, "Come on in truth." It locks every bolt. "Emily would have told me," I said. Mark looked over at me then. "Would she?" He didn't say it. He didn't have to. The next morning I woke up on Mark's couch with my dress hanging over a dining chair and a headache sitting behind my eyes like a brick. My phone had 17 missed calls. None from Emily. Most were from our mother's friends' cousins I barely spoke to, and one voicemail from Aunt Linda that started with Dana. "I don't know what kind of stunt you pulled." I deleted that one before she finished. I called Emily. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, call me, I'm worried." The message stayed blue for a while. Then it turned green. I stared at that little color change longer than a grown woman should. Blocked. My own sister had blocked me the morning after her wedding. I made coffee because that's what I do when I'm one bad thought away from throwing my phone. Army habits die hard. When life gets ugly, start with something simple. Boil water. Measure grounds. Make the bed. Check the locks. Mark came into the kitchen wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Do people sleep after ruining weddings?" "You didn't ruin it." I laughed once. "Tell that to Aunt Linda." He leaned against the counter. "Emily went through with it." I looked up. "What?" "They got married last night. Smaller room, private officiant, around 9:30. For a second I felt nothing. Then I felt everything. Like somebody had opened a drawer in my chest and dumped out every old fear I thought I'd packed away. When Emily and I were kids, I protected her from our father as best I could. We lived in a trailer outside Sumter back then, before Mom left for good, and Dad started drinking breakfast out of a coffee mug. I was 16 the night he shoved Emily against the refrigerator because she spilled milk. I stepped between them. He hit me instead. That became our pattern. Emily cried. I stood in front. Emily hid. I took the door slams, the shouting, the ugly words no child should ever have to hear. When I joined the army, part of me thought I was escaping him. But another part of me believed I was building a life strong enough that Emily could hide inside it whenever she needed to. That's a heavy job to give yourself. Heavier when nobody asked you to take it. I spent the next 2 days replaying every moment from the wedding weekend. At the rehearsal dinner, Trevor had laughed when Emily mispronounced a guest's last name. Not a big laugh, a quiet one. The kind that made everyone at the table smile politely while Emily's face went red. At brunch, she reached for a biscuit and he said, "Careful, sweetheart. That dress was expensive." She put it back. I remembered noticing that. I remembered telling myself he was joking. On Friday night, I'd found Emily alone in the restroom at the hotel near King Street, breathing into a paper towel. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Just nerves." But her hands were shaking, and I believed her. Or maybe Mark was right. Maybe I wanted to. That afternoon, my son Tyler called from Germany. He was 22, stationed near Wiesbaden, still young enough to think he knew everything, and old enough to worry about me like I was the child. "Mom," he said, "why are people online saying you walked out of Aunt Emily's wedding?" I closed my eyes, because people online don't know when to mind their business. So it's true. I stood in my kitchen looking at the magnets on my refrigerator. Fort Bragg, Myrtle Beach, a little faded school photo of Tyler missing both front teeth. It's complicated. He got quiet. Then he said, "Is Aunt Emily okay?" That question did something to me, because I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I had no idea whether my sister needed saving or whether she had walked straight into the fire and locked the door behind her. Later that night, I tried Emily again from Mark's phone. This time it rang. Once, twice. Then she answered. Her voice was flat. "Don't call me again. Emily, please, just tell me you're safe." There was a pause. In the background, I heard a man's voice. Low, sharp. Then Emily whispered, "You should have stayed away, Dana." The line went dead. 3 days after Emily hung up on me, I found out my sister had not just married into trouble. She had signed paperwork for it. That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. It does not always come with shouting or broken glass. Sometimes it comes in a PDF attachment with your name spelled correctly at the top. Mark didn't hand it to me at first. He had been careful since the wedding, careful with his words, careful with what he could say, careful not to turn my kitchen into some backdoor FBI briefing. But I knew him well enough by then to know when something had changed. He came over around 7 on a Wednesday night with takeout from a barbecue place on Coleman Boulevard. He put the bag on my counter and didn't open it. That told me more than any speech could have. What I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Dana, there's a financial crimes analyst I trust. Retired now, private sector." I asked him to look at something public, nothing classified. I stared at him over the kitchen island. Something public. Corporate filings, charity registrations, donation pages, stuff anyone could technically find. I didn't like the word technically. That word usually means you're about to hate the truth. Mark slid a folder across the counter. I didn't touch it right away. I was still in my Army PT sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no makeup, coffee gone cold in a mug by the sink. It felt ridiculous that my life could split open while I was standing there in socks, smelling brisket and stale coffee. Finally, I opened the folder. The first page showed a nonprofit name I recognized immediately. Mercer Veterans Support Initiative. My nonprofit. My small, boring, honest little operation that helped wounded veterans and their families with transportation, home repairs, and emergency bills. We were not fancy. We held pancake breakfasts at VFW halls and begged local businesses for raffle baskets. And somehow there it was listed as a partner organization on a glossy donor packet for the Hale Family Patriot Fund. I read the line twice, then a third time. "No," I said. Mark said nothing. I turned the page. There were donation totals, routing references, names of shell organizations that sounded patriotic enough to fool decent people in a hurry. Freedom Harbor Relief, Carolina Heroes Trust, Veteran Homefront Alliance. All of them linked somehow back to Trevor Hale's real estate network. My hands got cold. "How did my nonprofit get on this?" I asked. Mark's voice stayed low. "Emily's signature appears on 2 documents. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. Number. He nodded once and I hated him for it. Not because he was wrong, because he wasn't. The signature was there. Emily Grace Mercer Hale. Neat, clean, confident. My baby sister's handwriting tilted slightly right, just like on birthday cards she used to send when she remembered. I sat down at the kitchen table. For a minute, I could hear nothing but the refrigerator humming. Then Mark said, "Dana, I need you to breathe." "I am breathing." "You're not." I put both hands flat on the table like I was bracing myself for incoming fire. "She wouldn't do that." Mark didn't argue. That was one of the things I respected and resented about him. He didn't rush in to comfort me with lies. I kept reading. The deeper I went, the worse it got. A donation page with my photo from a Veterans Day event 2 years earlier. A paragraph about my Army service. A quote I had never given. A quote that made me sound like I personally endorsed their fund. That was when anger finally pushed past shock. "They used my uniform," I said. Mark's eyes dropped to the page. "They used my service." My voice cracked on that one, and I hated that too. Because money is one thing. Reputation is another. But the trust of people who served, people who came home, missing parts of themselves, people who already had to fight paperwork and pride and pain just to ask for help, that was sacred to me. And Emily knew it. That night I drove to the wedding venue myself. Mark didn't want me to go alone, which of course meant I went alone. The Naval Club manager was a tired woman named Patrice, who had seen enough wealthy family drama to recognize trouble by its shoes. I told her I needed to review hallway footage from Saturday night because my sister might be in danger. That part was true. Not the whole truth, but enough. Patrice looked at me for a long moment. Then she said I wondered when someone would ask. She brought me into a small office behind the coat check. The room smelled like toner, old carpet, and lemon cleaner. On the monitor, Emily appeared in the hallway outside the bridal suite. The timestamp read 5:41 p.m. She was alone, still in her wedding dress. At first she looked like the sister I remembered. Small somehow, even at 36. Her shoulders curled inward, her hands pressed against her stomach. She was crying. I leaned closer. Then something changed. Emily looked toward the ballroom doors, wiped under both eyes with her fingertips, and stared at herself in the wall mirror. The sound was faint, but Patrice turned it up. Emily whispered, "Just a few years." My stomach dropped. Then she said, "Then I'll finally have everything." I sat back slowly. There it was. Not innocence? Not exactly. Not freedom either. Something uglier and sadder sat between the two. A woman scared of the man she married, but still reaching for what he promised. Money, status, safety. A life far away from the trailer kitchen where we learned how to flinch before the shouting started. I didn't know whether to cry for her or slap sense into her. Maybe both. By Friday morning, Trevor struck first. He posted a long statement online through one of those polished family office accounts, saying certain individuals had tried to damage his wedding celebration after being questioned about missing charity funds. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. Then came the photos. Me leaving the wedding with Mark. Me looking angry. Me standing too close to him in the parking lot like we were plotting something. By noon, 2 veteran Facebook groups were arguing about me. By dinner, a woman I'd helped after her husband's stroke messaged me. "Please tell me this isn't true." That one hurt the worst. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there holding my phone while Mark read through the posts beside me. For the first time since the wedding, I wasn't confused. I was furious. At Trevor. At Emily. At myself for being useful to people who knew exactly where to cut. At 11:38 that night, an email came in from an address I didn't recognize. No name. No signature. Just one sentence. "You have no idea what Trevor does when women embarrass him." I didn't sleep after that email. I sat at my kitchen table until almost 4 in the morning with the overhead light off, staring out at my backyard while rain tapped against the windows over the sink. Mark wanted to trace the message. I told him not to. Maybe that sounds crazy now, but deep down I already knew who probably sent it. Not Trevor. Not some internet troll. A woman. A woman who knew exactly what kind of man Trevor Hale really was. And women like that usually stayed quiet for a reason. By the following week, my life had become strangely small. That's what public humiliation does when you're over 40. It shrinks your world inch by inch. The grocery store felt different. Church felt different. Even the gas station near my neighborhood suddenly felt uncomfortable, like everybody recognized me from something embarrassing I hadn't agreed to star in. I walked into Harris Teeter one Tuesday morning and stopped dead when 2 women near the produce section suddenly lowered their voices. One of them glanced at me, then away. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. But once your reputation starts cracking, paranoia slides in fast. At the nonprofit office, things got worse. We operated out of a small brick building outside North Charleston next to a tire shop and a pawn store. Nothing glamorous, just folding tables, donated furniture, old coffee, and volunteers trying to help veterans survive one more month at a time. By Wednesday, 2 regular donors had quietly pulled funding. No arguments, no accusations, just polite emails. Given recent concerns, we've decided to pause contributions until matters are clarified. That corporate wording almost made me laugh. Pause contributions. Like integrity was some streaming service subscription. One of our volunteers, a retired Navy medic named Frank, avoided eye contact while stacking supply boxes. Finally, he muttered, "People are talking Dana." I know. I'm not saying I believe any of it. But he didn't say he didn't believe it either. That was the part that burned. The uncertainty. The tiny hesitation in people's voices. I'd spent years building trust carefully, one family at a time. A wheelchair ramp here, emergency rent there, flights for veterans needing cancer treatment at the VA hospital in Durham. And now all it took was one wealthy family with lawyers and connections to smear mud across everything. That Thursday, somebody mailed photocopies of Trevor's online statement directly to our office. No return address, just pages folded inside a plain white envelope. I stood over the trash can reading them while my coffee went cold again. Mark found me there after work. "You need security cameras," he said immediately. I looked up. "Seriously?" "Yes." "You think Trevor's sending assassins now?" His expression didn't change. "I think people with money get dangerous when they lose control." I slammed the papers into the trash harder than necessary. "You still don't actually know anything." That landed harder than I intended. Mark's face closed off instantly. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You think I wanted this to happen?" I crossed my arms. "I think you dragged me out of my sister's wedding without enough proof. And I'd do it again." His voice rose for the first time since all this started. "I watched your sister shake every time that man touched her. You don't know Emily like I do." "No," he snapped, "I probably don't. Because apparently the Emily you know helped steal from veterans." That hit like a slap. He regretted it immediately. I could see it in his face. But once words exist, they don't crawl back inside your mouth. "Get out," I said. "Dana, go home, Mark." He stood there another second, exhausted, more than angry. Then he grabbed his jacket and left. The silence afterward felt enormous. I hated Trevor. I hated the rumors. I hated Emily. But in that moment, I mostly hated how quickly fear had turned me against the one person trying to protect me. Around 2 that morning, thunder shook the windows hard enough to wake me from the couch. At first, I thought I imagined the knocking. Then it came again. 3 fast knocks. I grabbed the old Louisville Slugger I kept beside the coat closet, divorce changes, a woman's home security habits, and walked carefully toward the front door. "Who is it?" "Nothing." Then softly, "Dana." "Emily." I opened the door so fast the wind nearly tore it wider. She stood there, soaked through from the storm mascara, streaked under both eyes, one hand gripping a small suitcase, and her lower lip was split open. For one horrible second, she looked 16 again. Not 36, not polished, not glamorous, just scared. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Emily stepped inside quickly and kept looking back toward the street like she expected headlights. I locked the door behind her. "What happened?" She shook her head immediately. "Don't start." "Emily." I said don't. I stared at her face, not just the split lip. There was exhaustion there, too. Deep exhaustion. The kind that settles into somebody after months of pretending everything's fine. I handed her a towel from the laundry room. She took it without looking at me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. I made tea because apparently that's what Mercer women do instead of having emotional breakdowns. When I finally set the mug down in front of her, Emily gave a tired little laugh. "You still buy the terrible chamomile. You still drink it." That almost felt normal. Almost. Then she looked up at me and quietly said, "You were right about him." Not because she admitted it. Because she sounded angry at herself for admitting it. I sat across from her slowly. "What did he do?" Emily stared into the tea. "He controls everything." "What does that mean?" "It means every credit card alerts his phone. Every account needs approval. Every conversation becomes a fight if he thinks I embarrassed him." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Did he hit you?" She hesitated too long. That was answer enough. I looked away before I did something stupid like cry. Or drive to Savannah and commit a felony. Emily rubbed both hands together nervously. "I thought I could handle him," she admitted. "I really did." "Why?" Her eyes finally lifted to mine. And there it was. Not greed exactly. Fear. Old fear. You know what it was like growing up, she whispered. I was tired of being scared all the time. That one nearly broke me, because suddenly I understood something awful. Trevor hadn't rescued the frightened little girl inside Emily. He'd recognized her and used her. Emily wiped under her eyes roughly. I know what you think of me. I don't even know what to think anymore. That's fair. She gave a bitter little laugh after that. Then she stood up suddenly. I can't stay here long. Stay as long as you need. No. She grabbed the suitcase handle tighter. You don't understand. If Trevor thinks I'm talking... She stopped herself. I stood too. Talking about what? Emily looked toward the dark kitchen window, then back at me, and very quietly said, his mother knows everything. After Emily said that she refused to explain another word. I tried. God knows I tried. I followed her into the hallway while she shoved damp clothes back into her suitcase with shaky hands. What does that mean, I asked. His mother knows what. Emily kept folding sweaters too fast and too hard. It means you need to stop digging. That's not happening. Donna. No? I stepped in front of her. People think I stole from veterans. My nonprofit is hanging by a thread. And now you're standing in my house at 2 a.m. looking like somebody punched you in the mouth. Emily looked away immediately. That told me enough. I lowered my voice. Did Trevor do that? Her silence stretched too long. Then she whispered, you don't understand how families like theirs work. I almost laughed at that. Families like theirs. As if money changed human nature. As if rich people didn't still use fear and shame and control the same way poor people did. They protect their own, Emily continued quietly. Even when they know exactly who someone is. And his mother, she's known for years. That sat heavy in my chest after Emily left. Because she did leave. She wouldn't stay the night no matter how much I pushed. Around 4 a.m, she hugged me stiffly at the front door, climbed into a rideshare, and disappeared back into the dark before sunrise. I stood on the porch barefoot long after the car was gone. Part of me wanted to run after her. Another part was furious she'd come at all. That became the exhausting pattern with Emily. Every feeling arrived carrying its opposite. Love beside resentment, pity beside anger, protectiveness beside disgust. The next morning, Mark came over looking like he hadn't slept either. He stopped cold when he saw my face. She came here. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. Is she okay? I crossed my arms. Depends how you define okay. Mark listened quietly while I told him everything except the split lip. I don't know why I left that part out at first. Maybe because saying it aloud would make it fully real. When I mentioned Trevor's mother, though, Mark's expression changed. That's interesting. Interesting, I snapped. That's your word. I mean useful. I hated how quickly that sounded clinical. She's my sister Mark, not an informant. I know. Do you? That question hung there awkwardly between us. To his credit, Mark didn't get defensive this time. Instead, he sat at my kitchen table and rubbed both hands slowly over his face. I'm trying very hard, he said quietly to help without making this worse. That softened me a little. Because underneath the FBI training and the calm voice and all the rest of it, Mark was tired too. Tired of watching me get dragged through hell. Tired of carrying things he couldn't fully explain. I finally sat across from him. So now what? He looked at me carefully before answering. That depends on whether you want revenge or the truth. I frowned. What's the difference? The truth takes patience. Revenge usually wants speed. That line stayed with me. Because up until then, I honestly hadn't separated the two. I just wanted somebody to hurt the way I was hurting. Trevor, Emily, maybe both. But Mark was right. If I moved too fast emotionally, Trevor would bury me financially before I even understood the game. Over the next 3 weeks, my life turned into paperwork. Not dramatic movie-style investigation boards with red string. Just endless boring records. Bank transfers, charity filings, real estate shell companies, tax documents, donation histories. Army logistics prepared me strangely well for that kind of work. Back during deployments, my entire job was organizing chaos carefully enough that people stayed alive. Turns out financial fraud works similarly. Small inconsistencies matter. Patterns matter. Missing pieces matter most of all. Every night, Mark came over after work, and we spread documents across my dining room table while local news hummed softly in the background. Some nights we barely spoke. Some nights we fought. One evening, I slammed a folder shut and muttered, I still can't believe Emily helped them. Mark leaned back in his chair. I don't think it started the way you imagine. What does that mean? I think Trevor figured out exactly what your sister needed emotionally. I stared at him. Mark continued carefully. People assume manipulation only works on weak people. That's not true. Usually it works on people who are desperate for something. Safety, status, security, a different life. The ugly part was, I understood it. Emily had spent her whole childhood terrified of overdue bills, screaming matches, broken appliances, eviction notices taped to doors. Trevor probably looked like Escape wearing a tailored suit. About a month after the wedding, the call finally came. Unknown Savannah number. I almost ignored it. Dana Mercer, I answered cautiously. A woman's voice replied low and controlled. You don't know me personally. Something about her tone immediately straightened my spine. This was not a woman accustomed to being interrupted. I'm Margaret Hale, she said. Trevor's mother. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I walked slowly onto my back porch so Mark couldn't overhear immediately. The late afternoon air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. You've got nerve calling me, I said. Yes, she replied calmly. I've been told that before. No apology, no warmth, no denial. Just cold southern composure sharpened into a weapon. What do you want? To prevent my son from destroying what remains of this family. There it was. Not love. Damage control. I gripped the phone tighter. You knew. Yes. You knew what he was. Another pause. Then, I knew what he was capable of becoming. That answer made me angrier somehow. Rich people always seem to think changing the wording changed the sin. Margaret continued. Trevor's father behaved similarly. I ignored it too long. My son learned what power looks like from him. I sat slowly in one of the porch chairs. For the first time since the wedding, I heard genuine exhaustion in somebody else's voice. Not innocence, not kindness, just fatigue. I can provide documents, she said quietly. But if this becomes public, Trevor will attempt to destroy everyone attached to him, including Emily. She's already destroyed. No, Margaret replied softly. Not yet. 3 days later, a sealed envelope arrived through a Savannah attorney's office. Inside were copies of offshore account summaries, internal emails, property transfers, and donation records tied directly to Trevor's companies. Enough to ruin him. Enough to ruin Emily, too. That was the hardest part. Because for the first time, I realized exposing Trevor might also destroy the last pieces of my sister's life. And despite everything, I still wasn't sure I could do it. By the time winter reached Charleston, I understood something I wish I'd learned years earlier. There's a difference between saving someone and carrying them. Saving is temporary. Carrying can eat your whole life. I spent most of November buried in documents while the world around me kept moving like nothing had happened. Christmas decorations went up downtown. Tourists still packed Market Street. Restaurants still overflowed every weekend with people drinking overpriced cocktails under patio heaters. Meanwhile, my dining room looked like an IRS office exploded inside it. Folders everywhere. Highlighted bank statements, sticky notes, 3 legal pads filled with timelines in my handwriting. Mark joked once that my Army logistics brain finally found its supervillain origin story. That earned him exactly half a smile. The truth was I was exhausted. Not physically, morally. Every new piece of evidence felt like another crack splitting through memories I used to trust. Emily helping approve fake donation campaigns. Trevor moving money through shell LLCs. Emails pressuring wealthy donors with implied threats, quiet payoffs, tax manipulation. And underneath all of it, the same ugly thing, people using patriotism as camouflage. That part made me furious in a way I can't fully explain unless you've served. There are some things you just don't touch. Veterans are one of them. One night around midnight, I finally pushed away from the dining room table and said, I can't tell anymore if I'm doing this for justice or because I'm angry. Mark looked up from his laptop. You're allowed to be angry. That's not what I said. He studied me for a moment. Then he closed the laptop slowly. You know what Trevor's counting on? What? That eventually this gets emotionally exhausting enough that you quit. I leaned back in my chair. And if he's right, then he wins. Simple as that. That was the thing about Mark. He rarely said dramatic things. But when he did, they landed clean. 2 weeks later, Trevor announced the Hale Winter Patriot Gala. Of course he did. A giant charity event in Savannah, featuring donors, politicians, veteran organizations, local media, and enough expensive bourbon to float a fishing boat. The invitation alone looked ridiculous. Thick, cream-colored paper with embossed gold lettering and valet details, included like guests were arriving for the Oscars instead of a tax write-off banquet. I almost threw it away. Mark stopped me. He's trying to repair his image publicly, he said. That means he's nervous. He should be. By then, federal investigators had already received copies of the financial records through legal channels. Quietly, carefully, no dramatic raids, no movie nonsense. Just patient work, which honestly scared me more. Because real investigations move slowly until they suddenly don't. A few days before the gala, Emily called unexpectedly. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken properly since the night she showed up at my house in the storm. Her voice sounded thinner somehow. Trev knows somebody leaked documents. I stayed silent. He's getting paranoid, she continued. He keeps checking my phone. You should leave him. A bitter laugh escaped her. You still think it's that easy? It can be. No, Dana. Her voice cracked slightly. Not after everything. That sentence carried more weight than she explained. Maybe legal exposure, maybe shame, maybe fear. Probably all three. Before hanging up, she quietly asked, Are you going to the gala? I looked toward Mark across the kitchen. Yes. Emily exhaled slowly. Then she said something strange. Wear the navy dress. The one you hated. I was jealous of you, she admitted softly. That stunned me enough I forgot to answer. Then the line disconnected. The night of the gala, Savannah looked like a postcard somebody rich paid extra for. Historic buildings glowing gold, horse carriages downtown, Christmas lights wrapped around old oak trees dripping Spanish moss. Mark drove separately for professional reasons neither of us discussed openly anymore. I arrived alone, and Emily had been right. I wore the navy blue dress, simple, elegant, not flashy. The kind of dress a woman wears when she no longer needs attention to prove she matters. Inside the ballroom, everything gleamed. Crystal, champagne, old money trying very hard to look charitable. Trevor stood near the stage, shaking hands like a senator running for office. Perfect tuxedo, perfect smile. But once you know somebody's real face, you can't unsee it. Now every grin looked rehearsed. Every laugh sounded hollow. When Trevor spotted me, his expression flickered for half a second. Just half. Then the polished charm came right back. Dana, he said smoothly as I approached. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. Emily stood beside him, wearing dark green silk and diamonds that probably cost more than my first house. But her eyes looked empty. Trevor kissed her cheek possessively without looking away from me. You look beautiful tonight, he said. I smiled politely. So do your accountants. That one landed. A tiny tightening near his eyes. Nothing more. But enough. About 40 minutes later, dinner ended, and Trevor stepped onto the stage for his keynote speech about supporting America's heroes. I nearly laughed hearing him say it. The ballroom lights dimmed while giant projector screens behind him displayed photos of veterans' flags, military families. Manufactured patriotism everywhere. Trevor raised a champagne glass. My family believes deeply in honoring sacrifice. Then the screens changed. At first, nobody reacted. Because numbers are boring. Spreadsheets are boring. Wire transfers are boring. Until you realize what you're looking at. Account totals, offshore routing, donation reallocations, internal payment logs. The ballroom slowly shifted from polite attention to confusion. Trevor stopped speaking mid-sentence. Behind him, another document appeared. Then another. The tech operator somewhere backstage was already panicking visibly. Guests started murmuring. A donor near the front squinted upward and said loudly, "What the hell is that?" Trevor turned toward the screens fully now. And for the first time since I'd met him, his mask slipped. Not dramatically. Not movie villain screaming. Worse, pure panic. Real panic. He barked toward the stage crew, "Turn that off. Now." But the damage was already spreading across the room like gasoline fumes. People were pulling out phones, whispering, recognizing account names. One older veteran stood up slowly from a nearby table. I donated to that fund. Another guest said those transfers are illegal. Trevor grabbed Emily's arm hard enough that even people 3 tables away noticed. "Did you do this?" he hissed at her. Too loud. Way too loud. The ballroom went completely still. Emily looked terrified. Not performative, not polished. Actually terrified. And suddenly everyone could finally see him. Not the charming developer. Not the generous donor. Just an angry man losing control in public. Federal agents entered quietly through side doors moments later. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just calm men in dark suits walking with purpose. Trevor looked around the ballroom wildly, realizing all at once that money could not buy this moment back. Then his eyes landed on me. I expected satisfaction. Victory. Something triumphant. But honestly, mostly I felt tired. Very, very tired. As agents escorted Trevor away, cameras flashed from somewhere near the ballroom entrance. Emily stood frozen near the stage, staring at me across the room. Not like a victim. Not like an enemy either. Just someone finally understanding the price of every choice she'd made. I picked up my coat quietly and walked outside into the cold savannah air. Behind me, the gala collapsed into chaos. Ahead of me, the street was silent except for distant carriage horses and December wind moving through the trees. 6 months after Trevor Hale was arrested, I stood barefoot on Sullivan's Island, watching the sunrise come up over the Atlantic, and realized I finally felt calm again. Not happy. Calm. At my age, I've learned those are not always the same thing. The ocean looked steel gray that morning, rough from overnight storms. A couple of older men sat farther down the beach with fishing poles planted in the sand, coffee steaming from thermoses beside them. Normal life. That was the strange part. You think a family explosion should permanently change the weather somehow, like the world ought to pause respectfully while your heart gets rebuilt. It doesn't. People still buy groceries, still complain about traffic, still argue about football, still walk dogs before sunrise. Meanwhile, your entire understanding of someone you loved can collapse quietly inside your chest while strangers debate barbecue sauce nearby. Trevor remained in federal custody awaiting trial on fraud and financial crime charges by then. A few local papers picked up the story for a while, especially once investigators tied multiple fake charities to his real estate network. Then the news cycle moved on. It always does. The nonprofit survived. Barely. We lost donors permanently. Some people never fully believed my side of things even after evidence came out. That hurt at first. Eventually, I accepted it. Trust returned slower than damage spreads. But other things surprised me too. Veterans I barely knew started showing up to help. A retired Air Force mechanic drove 3 hours just to repair our office plumbing for free. One woman mailed $20 every month with handwritten Bible verses tucked into the envelope. Frank, the Navy medic who stopped making eye contact during the scandal, walked into my office one afternoon carrying donuts and said, "I owe you an apology." I told him to sit down and help sort winter supply boxes instead. That was enough. Mark and I survived too. Honestly, there were moments I wasn't sure we would. Stress changes people. So does fear. We spent weeks snapping at each other over tiny things that had nothing to do with Trevor. Coffee left out, laundry piles, phone calls unanswered too long. But eventually the noise settled. One night around February, Mark looked at me across the couch and quietly said, "You know, most people would have run from this." I laughed softly. Most people weren't raised by Earl Mercer. That made him laugh too. First real laugh in months. Emily took a plea deal. That sentence still feels strange to say out loud. My little sister, pageant smile, pink bedroom walls growing up, always singing along badly to country songs in the car. Plea deal. She avoided prison time by cooperating fully and helping investigators untangle financial records connected to Trevor's companies. Part of me was relieved. Part of me thought she deserved worse. Both things can exist together. That's another lesson age teaches you whether you want it or not. She moved to North Carolina afterward. Small town near Asheville. Cheap apartment. Receptionist job at a dental office. No luxury condos, no galas, no diamonds. Just ordinary life. The first time she called after sentencing, we talked for almost 20 minutes about absolutely nothing important. Weather, traffic, whether mom's arthritis was getting worse. Like two women slowly learning how to speak again after surviving a fire. Before hanging up, Emily got quiet. Then she asked, "Do you think people can actually change?" I stood at my kitchen sink looking out at the backyard. "I think people can tell the truth eventually," I said. "That's not the same thing." "No," I admitted, "it isn't." A few weeks later, Tyler came home from Germany on leave. The minute he walked through my front door, taller somehow than when I last saw him, he wrapped me in a hug so tight my back popped. "You okay, Mom?" he asked quietly. I looked at my son, grown man now, really, and realized how exhausted he'd been worrying about me from another continent. "I'm getting there," I said. He nodded once. Then he smiled a little and added, "For what it's worth, everybody at my unit thinks you're terrifying." I laughed harder than I had in months. That night we ate takeout barbecue at my kitchen table while Tyler argued with Mark about college football rankings, and the dog next door barked at absolutely nothing for 2 straight hours. Perfectly ordinary. Perfectly priceless. Which brings me back to the beach. The bracelet sat cold in my hand while the sun slowly pushed color into the horizon. Emily gave it to me years earlier after my divorce. Thin silver chain, tiny charm shaped like a sand dollar. Back then I wore it almost every day. Not because it was expensive, because she gave it to me during one of the loneliest periods of my life. I turned it over once between my fingers, then finally dropped it into the water. Not out of anger, not punishment, acceptance. For most of my life, I confused love with responsibility. I thought loving someone meant standing between them and every bad decision they ever made. Turns out that kind of love can drown you. You can care about somebody deeply and still refuse to follow them into destruction. That lesson cost me more than I wanted to pay for it. But I learned it. And maybe somebody listening to this needs to hear it too. If your instincts keep warning you about someone, don't silence yourself just because family is involved. And if you've already lived through something like this, I'm genuinely sorry.